can't wait to unwind from some Overwatch with some chill Minecraft. Okay, maybe I'll play some Ori or Skyrim. The fuck's this piece of shit? God damn it still won't load. Microsoft has been slow cooking us for longer than the time between each real Paper Mario entry. They have tried to own as much of the industry as possible ever since they released the first Xbox. They wanted more Microsoft in more people's day-to-day lives. Ever since then, I can't escape this fucking logo. I mean, seriously, you could go your entire life playing games only owned by Microsoft. They own Activision, Blizzard, My Will, Bethesda, Rare, my social security card, and Mojang, along with so many more. They own around 32 development studios now. That is enough studios, assuming a 3-year development cycle, to release 8 AAA games a year. That is double what Nintendo typically releases. This all serves to create what looks like the beginning and the formation of a monopoly. To clarify, a monopoly is typically a game played with the family that causes endless arguments about the bullshit that is your fucking goddamn hotels on goddamn boardwalk. Fuck you. Oh, not the game? A monopoly is started when a large enough company can afford to do whatever it takes to either buy or outcompete their competition. This happens until there is no more competitors. At that point, they raise prices because no one else can compete with them. You just have to suck it up. Game Pass right now is an incredible deal. It has hundreds of games for a very reasonable price. They're adding so many AAA games that it almost seems insane not to buy it. Except you don't own shit from Game Pass, and they have delisted major releases in the past. So what about a future when games start to become exclusive to it? Plus, what am I gonna do without plastics to fill the ocean with? So when your favorite game gets delisted, you won't own it. Not just that, but we have seen how this plays out. Just look at how Netflix raised their prices and cracked down on password sharing. We had a good 10-15 years where this wasn't an issue, and suddenly they cracked down on it. It won't be for a long time, but this will be something we see in the future. Not to mention the subscription model is much less profitable to developers who aren't Microsoft, especially compared to you just buying the game. Microsoft has a major history of buying and not really touching companies for like 3 to 5 years, and then taking those games out back with this fucking bullshit. Microtransactions. I mean, I still don't think Minecraft has finished loading. Nor has the game been enjoyable ever since the game has had more power creep than fucking Overwatch. However, Microsoft has made it clear that they only care about the long game. So when the European Union forces a 15-year period where they're penalized, they don't care. This means in short term, yes, little will change. Maybe even we'll see some improvement. But this is at the cost of long-term consolidation that we are only beginning to see the start of. Let me make this clear. This isn't a competition of Sony versus Microsoft, because it's not even close. Microsoft could buy Sony and it would only be double the size of the Activision deal. This is a question of whether the entire industry could outcompete Microsoft. As it currently stands, yes, but they really are one more Bethesda-sized acquisition away from no longer being the case. This has been foreshadowed since the very beginning of the Xbox. There have been extremely few points in which the Xbox has been profitable. They lost so much money on the original and still lose money on the most recent Xboxes. And because they're Microsoft, they can just stomach it. This pure economical power makes comparing them to any other company a fucking joke. If they wanted to, they could just buy their competitors. Why haven't they? Because the slow cook is the only way they don't get stopped immediately. What's one more studio? What's one more? Microsoft has always handled acquisitions quite interestingly. I mean, Rare, they might as well have bought a rock at the bottom of the fucking ocean for how much good it gave them. But for more recent ones like Minecraft, they let the game keep sailing and it stagnated. And then they started adding content for the sake of adding content that doesn't actually help the core design of the game. Deep breaths. Deep breaths. Then they followed it up with soulless, boring spin-offs that were about as fun and functional as the previously mentioned bag of rocks. So what can we expect more than that? Well, I've already kind of touched on the fact that in short term, little will change, other than a few more games being on Game Pass and probably less microtransactions in Activision Blizzard games. However, in the long term, this is about the worst direction the industry can head. Consolidation leads to stagnation, especially when it is under a company incapable of making something that is able to load in under 3 minutes. How the fuck did this make it to This will also lead not only to everything being subscription-based in a world where you own nothing, but also a world in which Microsoft has so much more leverage over everyone else because only they can take the cost of what running something like Game Pass is until they can make it profitable. It is such an insanely good value, you would not be able to live without it. Like deep-fried Oreos. Why buy 5 AAA games when you can spend $15 and have access to all of them? Is what they're really trying to persuade us to do. The craziest part of all this is it seems no one sees this acquisition as a problem. In their trailer for the Activision acquisition, the comments were so overwhelmingly positive I could not find a negative comment, to the point where I thought they were botted. So few people seem to realize just how dangerous these acquisitions are to the health of the gaming space as a whole. Don't get me wrong. As an Overwatch fan, this is about our only hope of getting a functional game. But is that really worth the cost of a world where I can only play the game I want through Game Pass? Because in truth, that is probably the end game for Microsoft. Microsoft wants you to rely on Game Pass, not only because it will be the cheapest way to play the newest AAA releases, but also because once they can get away with it, they're going to start making games exclusive to it. I mean, it's clear they're not afraid of putting their games exclusively on the bold, wild, terrifying place that still won't load, known as the Microsoft Store. You know, they failed to convince people to move over to that one. But maybe if they own half the AAA games releasing, they can make people use it. I mean, Battle.net was only slightly more functional than Microsoft Store, so it's probably not too far of a stretch to say that they could force more people to move over to it with the right games. Or just by superior competition, I guess. I mean, Battle.net was only slightly better, but now they own it, so why even own Microsoft Store? They want to force themselves to be the #1 player for game releases, and the only way to play your favorite games. The problem is, when a game gets delisted, you can usually still play it, but with the direction we are headed, if the game was exclusive to Game Pass and had, say, licensed music, and they just choose not to renew the license, you could just have no way to play the game anymore. Especially with their push towards playing games on cloud, making it so you don't even have the files downloaded. I mean, nothing could beat having something physically on your hard drive. I mean, how else am I supposed to store this stuff? When you don't have access to your games, it means a future without modding. A future where Microsoft's whims can decide whether a game is okay or not. If Microsoft succeeds in the cloud gaming space, and they're the only real one in the space, we can see a future with little control over our games. Outside of the goals that seem a little impossible to reach, what we can realistically expect to see is a short-term improvement in Activision Blizzard titles, with reduced microtransactions, with the slightly longer term, them buying more studios to build out this insanely large roster of developers before they are able to release near monthly AAA games until they are decidedly the largest developer. They have made it clear that if they could, they would love to buy Nintendo. While Nintendo will certainly refuse, they have definitely been down bad before. Who is to say that after a bad console or two, what will happen as both Nintendo and Sony are solely dependent on their software and console sales? Well, Microsoft is so diversified that they can afford to take losses until they win. Gonna win the lottery this time. I didn't. Monopolies have historically marked some of the worst eras of history, especially for their respective fields. When one company can dictate the entire market for something, it ensures that the smallest of companies had no chance. If it becomes a point where the value of Game Pass becomes so high, what will become the point of owning games on Steam? Why play that weird new indie game that just released when you can play the next Bethesda title that you know will be good? This will lead to a gaming space where it will take being a part of Game Pass or something similar to be noticed, which will make the entire gaming market even more dependent on them and less unique as a result. I can't wait to play the 6th AAA game from Microsoft this year. My point is, we are reaching a point where you could very reasonably exclusively play games from Microsoft, and it does not even look weird. Platformer, Ori. Sandbox, Minecraft. Shooter, Halo. Open world, any Bethesda title. COD, Overwatch, Forza, Flight Sim, Doom. Most people probably didn't even realize that Microsoft bought Bethesda because so soon after they started buying Activision. Microsoft is buying companies faster than me in bed. If you want to look at another example of where we might be headed as a gaming industry as a whole, just look at the film industry with Disney. Microsoft is quickly becoming the Disney of games. Maybe not owning every major IP, but they own the majority of what you think of when you think of games or offensive wartime film. This slow march towards less inspired games is one we have already accepted as a whole as soon as we had a positive fucking reception to one of the worst historical acquisitions of all time. Again, basically anything would be better than Bobby Kotick's fucking Iron Fist and Frat House, but for all the good it will bring to Activision Blizzard, it'll bring massive harm to the rest of the industry as a whole. Another company that is doing something similar but much more in the shadows is Tencent. And while it's not something I can get too deep into right now because I'm more concerned about Microsoft balls deep fucking me, but Tencent is heavily invested in Discord, Epic, Riot, Ubisoft, and Paradox, among many others. With games being as expensive as they are today to produce, it seems like consolidation and heavy investment from either Microsoft or Tencent is just the way many companies have managed to sustain game development, and that sucks. Just how much influence is between two companies, one being a company that most people have never heard of and the other being Tencent. Hell, I mean, they are invested enough in Pokemon to have enough influence to be able to develop their own game. Pokemon Unite was made primarily by Tencent, and I think this really shows my point that many developers capable of making AAA games have taken a side with one or another for funding. Tencent is debatably worse in this aspect than Microsoft, and to be clear, my point is to look out for both when you're playing your next game, because they are kind of becoming everywhere. But whether it's Microsoft or Tencent, consolidation is bad. Just ask my plumber. Or my lower intestine. If either succeeds in their goals of becoming the Park Brothers' best-selling game, we might see a very different gaming landscape in 10-15 years from now, one much more dependent on subscriptions and less unique mechanics and interesting titles. There really is nothing we can do to stop their growth other than stop supporting it. Stop rooting for massive companies that have nothing in mind other than your wallet. I'm not going to advocate for boycott, because ultimately it's not going to make a difference, especially when basically every major release is owned by them either directly or indirectly at this point. So what are you gonna do, just not play games? But I just can't escape this goddamn logo. And it's still loading!